Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. My guest today is the author of the book War's Over, Come Home, which chronicles his family's 2-year quest through cities across the country looking for his son Andrew, a two-tour Marine veteran of the Iraq War who is running away from the war, memories, nightmares, hallucinations, and those that he loves. His relentless focus on the life of his homeless son is a microcosm of the national nightmare that 50,000 homeless veterans and their families are living through every single day. Yet he imbues every chapter with hope, hope for his son, hope for his marriage, hope for this country. The book is a memoir of love, perseverance, and hope. Patrick Smithwick, thank you so much for being a part of our show today, Free Thinking.
Montel, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited to be here with you too, sir, because it's one of the things you probably don't know a lot about me. I am a veteran of both the Marine Corps and the Navy. My career in the military spanned about a 22-year time period, and since I took my uniform off, I really never have taken it off because I've been involved in issues surrounding our veterans since almost the day I walked off active duty. I am a board member of Fisher House. I've been working on multiple initiatives in traumatic brain injury, PTSD. As a matter of fact, earlier this week, I just had a phone call with the Secretary of the Navy about a PTSD protocol that we've been working on now for 12 years that is now considered evidentiary medicine and is probably one of the only cures for PTSD that exists in the world. It not only helps for combat PTSD, but it also helps with any form of PTSD. And so we are rapidly moving this forward. This has been studied at Johns Hopkins, been studied at Walter Reed, been studied at King's College. The state of New York has utilized it and employed it. As a matter of fact, the state of New York is about to invest an inordinate amount of money in a validation study. Fort Hood. This has been incredible. There's, when we think about people like your son, I think there's a lot of people who think that, we bring them in, we don't really have a solution, but unfortunately, the solution has been here for 12 years. It's not taken us that long to really convince the entrenched bureaucrats that this is better than anything that they've had to date. And as a matter of fact, most of the therapy, the first line of defense is something called exposure therapy, which we know is not more than about 35% efficacious. But this protocol, which is called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, is 90% efficacious. 9 out of 10 of anyone who participates, 9 out of 10 of the people who participate in this protocol remit 100% of their symptoms in anywhere from 5 to 10 hours without any pharmaceuticals. So, as you search, and as we talk about what the search is all about and what your book is all about, know in your heart of hearts, the second that, and I pray that you're able to find your son, the second that happens, we are here. I'm standing by. You call us. I will ensure that he gets treated with this protocol within the first day he comes home.
That's wonderful to hear. I wish he could have gotten that protocol when he got out of the Marines.
Oh
After
my goodness.
2 tours, he had a long 5-year stint in the Marines, and after the 2 tours, there was no real decompression. He just came home from Iraq straight, and then he was on the Marine base 29 Palms for a month or month and a half, maybe 2 months, and then he was released. And at that point, he didn't know, and we didn't know that this PTSD was going to, become a problem. But when I look back on it now, I can see the beginnings of it at that point, the paranoia and the obsessive compulsive kind of actions. And it would have been great if he could have, experienced some of this treatment early on before the PTSD became so strong.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think right now that's what, again, this has been a protocol that's been around for 12 years. It's taken 12 years to get the validation by all kinds of organizations around the world This the protocol is so effective that it is being utilized right now in Poland and the Ukraine for Ukrainian warfighters and civilians who are suffering from the PTSD of this current war. And its efficaciousness has proven out to be the same. And so I so wish he would have been able to be, involved in this as soon as he was released. And it's very interesting. You just said that, my first duty station in the United States Marine Corps after boot camp was 29 Palms. So
Yeah, 29 stumps.
29 stumps. I was out there in the middle of the Mojave Desert in the sun with them sand fleas for quite a while. About 9 months out there before I transferred out and ended up in Newport, Rhode Island. Let's go back for a second. Let's start talking a little bit first before I introduced what the book title was. But let's talk a little bit about what life was like with you and your family before Andrew entered the Marines. And let's talk a little bit about your life, because your life is really significant. I mean, you wrote 3 books, and let's just talk a little bit about life was like in general before Andrew even entered the Marine Corps.
All right. Well, I'm here right now in the refurbished milking parlor of a barn, and I'm on the farm where I was brought up. My father was a steeplechase jockey and was the leading steeplechase jockey of all times, which is a legendary athlete and rider. And my father and uncle were the as a brother team, or the winningest brother team in sports in American history.
Wow.
Mikey and Patty, they teamed up together. My father rode the horses, and my uncle trained race horses, and they're both my uncle and father are in the Hall of Fame. So I grew up in that horse world, and I was a steeplechase jockey myself when I was young, which meant that I was very much, and I transferred all this to my children. I was used to getting up at 5 every morning, and I go to the racetrack at Pimlico, and I gallop 5 or 6 horses before classes at school, and then before going to classes at Johns Hopkins. And I love the horse world and being outside and being out in the fresh air. And I like you test yourself every single day. You're testing yourself to see what you're made of. And when you leave the barn in the morning, in the early morning, you have communicated with these horses who are these incredible athletes, and you might have escaped a few dangerous situations. And then meanwhile, around you, you are seeing people who are occasionally being injured. And when I was 15 years old, I had a very difficult time. My father had a very bad fall and was paralyzed, and the doctors weren't sure if he would even live. And that had an effect on me. And he fought his way back. And then I worked for the family, so I'm very family oriented. I was riding races basically for the family to help him. So then he recuperated, but he died at a young age. So I transferred these values of hard work over to my children. And Andrew had a great upbringing. He was often over here at the farm riding, and I used to bring him riding. And he was a good middle school and high school. He loved cross country running, and I'm an athlete. I have to, because of my upbringing, I guess. I'd get on about five or eight horses every morning, 7 days a week. In horse business, you don't have any breaks.
Right.
And so I would often run with Andrew, and he was on cross country, and we did a lot together. We canoed, we ran, we bicycled. You mentioned skiing earlier, and he was a phenomenal skier. And then he was a bit rebellious as a teenager, and in high school as a senior, he decided at that time to join the Marines about 8 months or a year after graduating from high school.
And wait a
And
minute, before you even go into if you go into Andrew, you literally, well, you talk about yourself as being an athlete and a horse trainer, but you did very well in school yourself, correct? Let's talk about your education.
oh yeah, I really liked school in a lot of ways. I went to Gilman School, and I wrote the history of Gilman School here in Baltimore. It's a really good independent all boys school. And when I was a child growing up, my father died young, and I had the upbringing on the racetrack was a bit on the wild side. Often, say before I went to, often after galloping my last horse, or say one morning, I asked the assistant trainer, I said, "Well, where am I going to get some breakfast before I go to school?" And they brought me to this little pub called the Uptown Bar and Grill. And they said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, juice and some eggs." They gave me a hard boiled egg, a shot of blackberry brandy, and a piece of beef jerky. So there was life on the racetrack was very different from what all of my friends were accustomed to. And on, Sunday mornings, they were all sleeping until 10 o'clock. I was at the racetrack galloping horses at 5:30 in the morning. But then I graduated from Gilman. I went to Johns Hopkins, which I just loved. And this is in 69, early 70s. The Vietnam War is going on, and it was just an incredibly intellectually inspiring time. John Barth, the writer, was there. I had really good professors in English, and so I loved Hopkins. And then when I got out of Hopkins, I went to work for a newspaper for a year. As soon as I graduated from Hopkins, I got this job working on this little newspaper called the Dorchester News. And within a month, the editor left, and I became the editor straight out of college.
That's
And
great.
I had a good time there. And then a year later, I went to Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, a university that I love. Richard Dillard was there. Henry Taylor. I have a blurb on my book by Henry Taylor,
Hmm.
the Pulitzer Prize winning poet, and he taught at Hollins for a while. But my main point about Hollins is after about 4 months there, someone kept saying, "You have to meet this young woman called Annesley Dickinson. She's beautiful and she's in France. She's coming back and you're just going to love her." And they were right. I saw her one day and it was love at first sight. And I sat down, had a cup of coffee with her in the cafeteria, and we've been together ever since.
That's
So
incredible.
then after Highlands, I got a EFM education in ministry with the Episcopal Church, and that was with Carl Edwards, a very influential rector at our church who had marched with Martin, as he called him.
Hmm.
And Carl's still with us. And I love him. I got that degree, and at the same time, I got a degree at Hopkins in called a Master of Liberal Arts, mainly because I was teaching at a lot of schools, and the schools would help pay for the degrees, and it was just fun taking all the courses. So I've been in
Right.
and out of colleges. Then I've been. I'll stop this rant in a minute. Then all this time I started teaching also, which is where I learned more than anywhere else, really teaching English and creative writing and medieval history in prep schools.
And wrote multiple books. You've written 3 books. Well, 4 books,
I wrote
including this one right now.
those 3 books, and I also wrote a history of Gilman School and a history of a hospital here in Baltimore called Union Memorial Hospital.
That's
Um,
right. I know that well. I'm a Baltimorean too. I don't know if you knew that.
oh, I forgot that. Right.
I was born in Cherry Hill and grew up in the right outside of Baltimore in Glen Burnie. Went to Andover High School in Glen, outside of the city. It's now called North County, and graduated from there. And then I literally was back after I graduated from high school. I entered the Marine Corps just like Andrew did. Then I got selected to go to the Naval Academy. So I went to the Naval Academy Prep School in Newport, Rhode Island, then went back to the Naval Academy. I'm a class of 1980.
Oh,
So just a few years behind you. But let's talk about it because Andrew did the same thing. I mean, he matriculated and went into the Marine Corps after graduating from high school.
he graduated from high school, and then, as I said, he was a bit of a rebel and was rebelling against his family and against our lifestyle. In general, he got tired of me being so working so hard and ambitious. He's sort of slow is smooth and smooth is fast. The mantra: slow
Right.
is smooth, smooth is fast. And he goes along and he does everything just right and gets it done, and that's how he used to do his work. And I'm kind of running around in a rush, and I was ambitious, and we bumped heads a few times. But
Sure.
we went on a great college tour, and we thought he was going to go to college, and then he just decided he wanted to go into the Marines. So then he went in at a tough time. He's only in there a year or two, and next thing he was in Iraq. But the Marines, what Andrew needs, Andrew has a very high IQ, but when he was tested by the schools and everything, his difficulties with planning. So he has all this imagination and this ability to understand and comprehend things, but his planning was his difficult thing in school and in life. So the Marines were really good for him about that because, as you know, once you get in there,
Absolutely.
you're on a strict schedule, and he just thrived on it. And matter of fact, he loved Paris Island. when he went to Paris Island, he's out of high school. I had him kick ass fit. I mean, because he'd been running cross country all year, and a friend of his, Nick, who became a sniper in the Marines later, and was actually killed in Iraq. A friend of his was training for the Navy SEALs endurance tests. So when Andrew went into the Marines, he was dead fit, and he would write me these notes, and he'd say, one time this sergeant was trying to get to him and wanted him to say something about his girlfriend, and Andrew wouldn't say it, and this because Andrew had a picture of his girlfriend under the bunk. You might know what I'm talking about.
Of
And the
course.
sergeant found it. So the sergeant picked his trunk up and threw it down and threw his clothes all across the room and cussed him out, made him go outside, sort of a cool hand Luke thing, had him digging holes and running and doing push-ups, and kept saying this, that he wished he hadn't put the picture there, and something about his girlfriend. Andrew wrote me a letter, a short note later, and told me all about it. And he said, I never broke down, Dad. And he
There
said,
you go.
to tell the truth, I love it here.
There you go. Well, he
Then he
sounds like his time in the Marine Corps, especially before deployment, was pretty similar to mine because I was at 29 stumps, and believe it or not, while there, I was part of the 100-mile club, which was you had to run 100 miles a month.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I like overtrained. I was one of those aggressive overtrainers. I ran 100 miles every month for about 7 months in a row, and I always scored, 300 or above on the PFT. And I also am a Sand Flea guy. I went to Paris Island also. I graduated from Paris Island in 1974.
Oh,
So I get it. I understand it. And other than that, though, what was his life like in the Marine Corps? Because you heard from him quite often, right?
and it was really good before email became so prevalent. When he went on his first tour over there, and early on in about 2000, what was it, 2005 or six, we would get letters from him, and very well written letters. As a matter of fact, first of all, in Paris Island, we get these little notes, and he only had, as you know, he only had about 10 minutes to write letters, and he'd write these cryptic, really nice notes on marine stationery. That's when he said he told me about that tough day, and he said, to tell the truth, Dad, I love it. And then when he was in Iraq, he would send us letters, and once or twice, once in his first tour, he called us up. I'll never forget. It was Father's Day, and it was a sunny day here on the farm, and we had the windows open, and we had it all planned. He could send us an email, and he called, and there was this real lag time, almost 5 seconds, and he was calling to say that he had volunteered. This is only about 2 months from when his tour duty was to end. The Marines were really good on having the tour duty being the precise time, and it was to end. And he had volunteered to go up on this mission to get on a helicopter with the colonel and go up near the border area. And we had this chat with him, and he was, and then he said, "I love you," and he couldn't tell us much about it, but he was saying, "I might not see you again." So then he did that. Then we didn't hear from him for about a month and a half, and then he got back, and we got an email, and he was all right. So the first time he was over there, it was tough because, as you know, we weren't doing very well,
No.
and he didn't have a vest. It was just ridiculous, and he saw someone, a grenade. Someone came up. The enemy came up with a pickup truck outside the base and launched a grenade and blew someone he knew in a shower. And he saw a lot of rough things. And then the second time he went, he had to do a lot of sweeping through the houses, greet and meets, he called it. And he wrote us good letters on that and explained that it was more dangerous, but that they really had their act together then, and he thought everything was going well. The On the first tour, I have to tell you, I was teaching middle school, and I was teaching medieval history. And at one point, we were all into the Middle East, and I was teaching all about Baghdad and where Iraq is now and everything. And Andrew sent a letter, and he said that the day before he had been on this long patrol up on top of a truck with the Madus, the huge machine gun, and they were patrolling about 2 miles an hour through the desert, and it's hot and it's boring. and he looked up and he saw a caravan with about 400 camels portray, you know, going across the desert. And he said it was just such a beautiful and amazing thing, and it could have happened in 1000 AD as well as 2000. So he had some experiences then, but the Marines were good for him. In general, when he was in the Marines, it was a pretty good experience. He did once or twice hook up with some guys that thought they were tough and could beat the system, and ran around a little bit with them. They weren't the best influence,
Right.
but the whole Marine situation was very good for him.
And then he got out. He came home, right?
Then he got out and he was in pretty good shape. He got first thing he did is he ended up we ended up driving across the country to New York, and his mother went up. His mother does everything for him. And first, we got him an apartment out in California. He was going to go to college out there. Then we thought there was too much of the old influences of everything out in California, and it might be good to come to the East Coast. And I kind of want him closer. So he's going to go to college in Brooklyn, in New York City, and his mother got him an apartment. He got a really good job working security for the Bank of America, and things were going really well. But he started going down. He kind of got bored with that, and he ended up moving to Michigan. And this buddy of his had a get rich quick scheme growing pot, and he was going to move to Michigan. It was a guy that he'd been in the Marines with, and it was legalized out there. And he went out to Michigan. He was out there a year or two, and that didn't work too well. And he went to California, and he one of his more interesting jobs in California. He what did he do? He went to truck driving school. At the time, I was teaching middle school, and I was getting look. I love middle schoolers, and I was doing really well. I just love teaching middle schoolers. I think they should rule the world. But I was getting a little weary some days, and I thought it'd be cool to go on the road with him driving a truck. Anyway, but he drove this tractor trailer for about a year, and he did that. And then at that point, that job actually probably was not the best for him because he's by himself so much. And he
Right.
started having what I call ghosts in his head. He started getting paranoid and thinking people were talking about him. And he was kind of a ladies' man. The women would all just fall for him, and he started having problems with his relationships. And so he quit that truck driving job, and he came back and he got a really good job with my uncle, a Hall of Fame trainer working with horses, and did that for about a year. That was one of his best jobs. But gradually, this paranoia started getting to him and getting worse and worse. And he
And I
started,
mean, I guess you were clearly recognizing the fact that he was clearly showing some of those hidden or invisible symptoms from PTSD, right?
yeah. In general, in the book, I have this scene where I'm going out to try to California. I sit down to this woman. The people were so wonderful in helping us on our trip to find Andrew. We looked at cities all over the country. We would be well, basically to jump from where I was, then all of a sudden he was gone. We didn't know where he was, and
And no, wait, explain that for a second because that happened before you went to California to start talking to people. So you're
right.
in touch with him, you're in touch with him, and then all of a sudden
Then
he
he
just
got his
disappeared?
well, his paranoia got a little worse, and he started he started taking some drugs, and his paranoia was worse, and he started breaking up with his girlfriends. And then we'd get these notices. He'd get these good jobs, and then he'd lose the jobs. And then he lost this one job, and he went out to Denver, and uh, he kind of got in a fight with his brother. And next thing, he took off, and we didn't hear from him for a long time. The next thing we knew, he was driving his car all across the country, back and forth across the country, doing something very mysterious. He liked this a little bit of the gangster, and supposedly
Mhm.
making some money and maybe having something to do with drugs. And so
Mhm.
anyway, the police arrested him in this little town in Dickinson County, Kansas. Next thing, they threw him in the clink for about a month. Well, he got out of there, and then when he got out of there, he was really paranoid. And the woman that's where he was staying saw him all in a crawled up in a kernel like this, huddling in a corner, and the paranoia got worse. And then within about 8 months or a year, he sort of fell off the whole platform. We couldn't find him anywhere at all. We didn't know where he was, and we started searching for him all over the country.
Well, and then
And
then when that, I mean, just explain that for my listeners to make them understand. I mean, you guys were, a family that looked out for each other. You were there for each other, and then all of a sudden, your son disappears. I mean, what did that do to you and your wife to begin with?
well, and then well, there were some phone conversations before he completely disappeared, and his PTSD manifested himself. He thought his brother was in the FBI, his his sister's in the FBI, and all these things like that. And it just got worse and worse. And so with the family, there was a lot of tension because, well, my son and I usually wanted to very aggressively look for him, and my daughter and my wife wanted to be a little bit more gentle in looking for him. There's a big difference when you're searching for someone, if you're going to allow him to see us, what we would do when we got him. And so a couple of times, like the first time we went and searched for him in Orlando, we finally found him there, and I followed him. This is the last day of looking all through Orlando. For 3 straight days, we'd been down there. It was right after Trump became president. And on the way to the airport, we spotted him. And I followed him for an hour, just walking behind him, trying to talk to him. And he wouldn't admit that I was his father. He wouldn't acknowledge that he knew me. And I tried to talk to him, and it was just heartbreaking. At that time, he's working construction. Then after that, then he knew we were looking for him, so he took off. He went to Montana. He went up to Seattle. And then from Seattle, he went to California, and then he went to New Mexico. So we were involved with the police, with detectives, with Facebook postings, and people would send us a posting, say, "We think we've seen him. We think we've seen him." And so I'd jump on the airplane and I'd go out to the sea. I went all the way to Seattle once on just a whim. Someone said they saw him, and didn't actually find him there. So that was our life for about 3 years. And now
And
we
for 3 years, you're running all over the country trying to find him, and clearly he doesn't want to be found, but you're not giving up because you know he's ill. And
right.
along the way, did you run into people who had spent time with him, who gave you assessments of where he
Yes.
was, what was going on?
Yes, we met a lot of people, and everyone was so helpful. It was incredible. The homeless people themselves were very helpful. But the main problem was that Andrew is a tall, handsome, kind of thin. I told you he's a cross country runner, and when he wasn't doing very well, he got kind of gaunt. Anyway, so many people, everyone, all the homeless people, and all the people in all the Catholic charities and all the different missions and places that are trying to help with the homeless wanted to help us, and they would always say, "Oh, we've just seen him," and because they'd see our Facebook postings, and so they would think that it was Andrew, but usually it wasn't Andrew. Usually it was someone else that looked a little like Andrew. I could always tell because he's quite tall. He's about 6'3" or so, and they would say, "Oh, he's tall." And one time we went all the way to San Diego, and we searched for a week, and we finally found this guy called Drew, and he was only about 5'10", but everyone thought that was Andrew. So, but the police were helpful. They put out missing reports, and people from all over the country would send us notes on Facebook and would call us. And often my son, in particular, Patty, would just jump in the plane and go to wherever it was and track down the person and usually discover it wasn't Andrew. Now, a couple of times it was Andrew, and I could talk about those later, but you look like you want to ask me a question.
No, no, no. Go ahead. A couple times it was Andrew. What happened?
Towards the end of the book, towards the end of the book, I get a call from Patty.
Wait. You just I do have a question. You said towards the end of the book. What made you decide to chronicle this in the book to begin with?
Oh, good
Yeah, I
point.
know that's who you are. That's the nature of who you are. You've written multiple books, and so I can imagine that you wanted to be able to share your journey with others who might be experiencing something similar. But what made you say, I'm going to write this down so that I can chronicle this for people?
Well, when I first started going through the experiences, the first experience really was going to Orlando, and I'd never been among the homeless like that. I'd never been in all these homeless shelters. I'd never talked to hundreds of homeless people, and it wasn't just me. I was doing it with my wife, who uh, who was very organized, determined, and perseverant. And we had this, and then we did find him, and we did try to talk to him, and we just had this horrendous emotional time. And I got back, and I just thought, well, I should write this down. I didn't really know why. And then it was only a few months later, well, it was about 6 months later, I went to Seattle and had these incredible experiences. So I'm a writer and I've kept a journal all my life. And so when I was on the experiences, I would have my pad and I'd take notes. And it's sort of just something to do to keep myself organized and get the people's names and find out the homeless shelter. They said they saw someone that looked like him, and I'd write her name down and the phone number. And I was taking all these notes during the outings, during the trips. And then on the way back, I'd get a legal pad out and I'd start writing about some of the experiences and some of the homeless people I met and what their lives were like. And when I got back, I had a full time job. I was teaching middle school and running this farm. And I was actually also finishing a book called Racing Time, which was about losing three of my best friends. And so here I am writing a book about losing three of my best friends, and then also going through this experience. So writing about it sort of helped me get through it. And when I get back, I'd sit here in my office and I'd have all these little pieces of paper and business cards and notes, and I'd put them all around me, and I'd just write up early in the morning. I'd have like 45 minutes before I went to work at the school and just take notes and write up my experiences while it was all still hot. And at the time, I thought maybe a magazine story or maybe something more. And I polished one or two of them. And then I never really had time to do it as a magazine story. And I kept writing it. And next thing I knew, I could see that a book was developing, and I could see the themes. And I was reading, I was doing a lot of reading at the time. And I was sort of reflecting I was going through with these other books. And it all just started to happen. But when I was writing it, I really didn't know how it was going to fall into place, or I had the raw material down, but I didn't have the exact plan until later on.
And what was the raw experience like for you? I mean, I get it. I understand it's who you are by nature to, chronicle what your experiences are, but what was going on inside of you, sir? I mean,
Yeah,
this is the loss of a son.
that is uh, a really interesting and sort of and kind of emotional. I would have to have an emotional answer for that. But
It's okay.
it was on so many different planes. Because going through the experiences, when I would go to Seattle or Santa Fe or San Diego, and in San Diego one time, we were in this place. It was just so forlorn, so desperate, and all these needles and threats of hepatitis, and the homeless people on drugs and heroin everywhere. Anyway, but I would just get into it. It was my job, and I was going to do it. And it's like sometimes my father said when I have a theory on writing. It's called the Calprod theory of writing, and people talk about writer's block. And when I was a kid and I got a car, my father would always wake me up at 5 o'clock to go get on the horses before school. And when I got a car, I started staying out a little late. And he came in, he said, "Son, Patty," he called me, "it's time to get up." And I'd turn over and go back to sleep. So one time he came in, he said, "Time to get up." I didn't get up, and he hit me in the butt with a cow prod. It's about this long, filled with batteries, and I jumped out of the bed. And from then on, when he said it's time to get up, I jumped out of that bed.
Absolutely. Gotcha.
Well, anyway, on those searches, the whole family, we were on the cow prod theory, and we were searching for him. And then I was talking on the way back on the plane. I'd be talking to people about it, and then I got back, and it was just surreal to be in this different world when I got back, of realizing I would be here with the horses and I might get on a horse and go for a ride. And I was living a parallel life. And I'd be thinking, Andrew is walking now. Or I'd get up many mornings really early and I'd go for a long hike, and I'd be channeling myself in Andrew because he is my son, and I'd be sort of feeling like I was in his body marching, and that he was in my body marching, and that we were going through all this together. So that would be extremely emotional. Then I come back and I write about it, which sort of objectifies things. I turn on my writer self. But sometimes when I was writing, I'd start crying and break down, and other times I'd just trying to get everything on paper. So it was very in and out. And then the other thing that was really weird, s- strange, was when I'd go to a social occasion or meet somebody sometimes, and I this happened very, very often. They'd say, "How are your kids?" I'm getting to the age where people are just talking about their kids all the time. They don't know how to
Mhm.
talk about themselves anymore. And at one point, my wife Ansley and I would say, "Well, my son Patty's doing well. He's a dentist in Denver, and my daughter Eliza is engaged, and she's a designer and doing really well." We might not say that much about Andrew. Then after a while, I said, "To hell with that," and I'd go right through. I'd start with Patty, the oldest, doing well, and then I'd say Andrew is missing. We think he's in the Southwest, and uh, and then I'd talk about Eliza. And so that was kind of strange. And then the other thing would happen is sometimes you'd be at a party or something, and someone would talk about, well, it happens all the time, talk about the homeless, and they might say, just recently I was at a Christmas event over winter, and this guy was telling me, oh, how his son lives in this tough area in LA, and there are all these immigrants, and it's so tough, and homeless are taking over the area, and the government can't do anything about it. So he's talking all about this, and you can't walk down the street without bumping into a homeless person. And I'm standing there, having a drink and talking to him, and we're at the Christmas party, and I'm sort of burying it. I'm burying it. I'm burying it. And then at one point, sort of my old 18-year-old self starts coming up out of my chest, and I'm thinking about decking the guy. And
Right.
then, but but I don't do that, and I just and but I just walk away from it. But then when that happens, when someone's talking about it, and I realize that my son is one of these people that are are stereotypes are generalized about the homeless, and that's very difficult.
Must
So
be, and
yeah,
especially when we're living in a time right now where close to 50,000 veterans are on the streets every day. And, it doesn't seem as if we're doing anything to help them, though I know that there is outreach and those kinds of things. I mean, how often do you receive any tips about where Andrew is now? And he still is out there. And so you've got to be afraid, especially understanding his depth of mental illness right now, that he is one that could be preyed upon.
we about 3 years ago, through an older friend of mine, that knew someone in the Navy, and who's a colonel and fairly high up, and he did some research, and he found out that that Andrew was doing okay, and he told my friend, he said that he thought Andrew would be all right because of his Marine training, which you can understand, and so we can't find out where Andrew is exactly because of a lot of it's because of HIPAA, because we know he's getting he gets some help from the Marines. He gets
The VA.
benefits from the
Okay.
VA. But anyway, so that colonel gave us the point that he is a survivalist homeless person, and he is strong, and we've seen pictures of him recently from a retired policeman who occasionally sees him in the Southwest area, and he looks like he's fairly strong, and he has a tent, and he has his gear on a bicycle. A story I was going to tell you earlier was that the last time we saw him was he had been hiking down out of the foothills of Albuquerque, and by mistake had been hiking through a pueblo, which is called an Indian pueblo, or a reservation. And the police there, the Santa Ana Pueblo police, pulled him over and asked what he was doing. And they sent us this video. And on the video, he's standing there really gaunt with his beard and his backpack. And he said, well, I'm just walking through here. everything all right? And they said, well, no, this is property. And he said, I thought I was getting some funny looks coming through here. And they said, yeah, this is owned by the Indians. And, they might not like you going through here. And this was the line I like. He said, well, I didn't see any sign. You need to get a bigger sign here.
Mm.
Anyway, they took him off the reservation and brought him to a Walgreens. But as soon as the police there were really good, and they looked on, we have him on all these federal missing persons lists, and they found him on that, and they sent us the video. And so the next day we were in the airplane, we were in Albuquerque looking for him. And that's kind of what happens. My son called me up. He said, well, we've got this video, and Andrew, and it's definitely Andrew. So we went out there and looked for him for a week and hired detectives and got lawyers and had everything all set up. And long story short, in the end, it didn't work out. He was just left to go wherever he wants.
Right. And then so now where do you think, I mean, so that was the last time you heard from him. So where do you think he might be now? Is same area of the country? He's got to be somewhere where it's warm, I'm sure. Um
He's,
uh
we
and
think
nomadic.
excuse me, he seems to be staying in the southwest and around Albuquerque, and he seems to have settled down there. About 2 years ago, my Andrew's uncle is a Marine, and he went out and looked all over Albuquerque, and he found, and that was actually is 2018, so that's 5 years ago, and he found Andrew in a park, and he was about the only homeless person you ever see in the park who would get up and had a circuit and would run 4 or 5 miles. And it just broke my heart and he had a red bandana in his back pocket, which I always have a red bandana in my back pocket. And I used
Mhm.
to run with Andrew when he ran cross country. And Graham found him out there, but Andrew wouldn't talk to him, wouldn't admit that we were his family. The last time someone talked to him about me back in about 2019, he said, I don't have a father. He's dead. You know, and so, and he's just all by himself. And that's what hurts his mother so much, and he was the most social child that we had, and loved being in the family, loved being a part of the family. But now day after day, and we've talked to a lot of people where he stops by the pancake house, and we talked to the woman that worked there, and we stopped at a 7-Eleven where the woman just loved him where he used to go sometimes, and they all like him to come in because they said it makes him feel safer because sometimes these places are in some rough neighborhoods. They really liked him, but he's just always by himself, and that hurts us a lot.
Well, what do you hope you can achieve with this book? Do you think that he'll read it one day and recognize that, you love him and you're just trying to find him and trying to help him? Or I mean, what do you hope to achieve with your book?
That I was thinking of that before you called, and I went for a walk, and I was kind of channeling Andrew. And as I was walking, I was thinking, well, Andrew's probably walking right now. He walks 10 or 13 miles a day, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if he saw this book and he read this book and he gave us a ring and said, "I'm coming home." So that's what I'm hoping, that something like that could happen, and that also that people will read it. It's on two levels. First of all, that Andrew might he might read it, see it, and that he might come home. And then secondly, that people will understand that there, as you said, there are so many vets with PTSD in these cities. I talked to over and over. I talked to hundreds of veterans from Vietnam all the way back. Many from Vietnam still, especially up in Seattle, Iraq, Afghanistan, and even other wars, and to make people realize that so many families, I met other families who are going through the same thing, and to get help for these veterans. Andrew, the VA was very good with Andrew in many ways. We had him in Loma Linda in California. They had finally, my son managed to get through a lawyer 350 pages of progress reports. He was there for about 4 weeks. They had doctors, MDs, psychologists, psychiatrists, chaplains, reports from all of them working with Andrew. And At the time, he was getting better and better. This is 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and, it was so sad, and then he just one day didn't wanna take any more of their he wasn't taking their medication. One day, he just said, "That's it," and he just left, and he went back to his being a homeless person again. So,
Wow.
we just
What
hope that he comes back.
absolutely. I mean, how has this impacted the other members of your family? I'm sure your wife has got to be heartbroken, his siblings heartbroken.
Yes,
It's not as if you must understand it's not that he doesn't love you or doesn't like you or hate you or it's part of his mental illness that is driving what goes on inside of his head when he's in the dark or in the night by himself when he's battling demons of what he saw and what he went through. Knowing that, I mean, how's that impacted you in the relationships with your other members of your family, and how has it impacted them individually?
it's, well, first of all, myself, I have to say that early on one time, we got Andrew to come home, uh, before we completely lost him. And then he started walking out the driveway. And make a long story short, then we called 911 and the EMT and the fire department came and this, that, and the other. And then he started walking away as he did in Orlando and as he'd done before. And he was walking away. And I could see that he could just walk on down the road out to the Baltimore Beltway, out to 95 and go anywhere in America. And I dove on him or tried to stop him and I dove on him, and then when I dove on him, he flipped me over his back and I smashed down on the asphalt and I was knocked out. My glasses flew off, and next thing the police were there and the EMT, and it was this and all these cars, this horrible chaotic thing. And after that, I was a little bitter for a month or two, and then I came back and I just devoted myself more than ever to finding him, and I could understand, after all, I did dive on him and to try to stop him. And then now, I just as much as anyone in my family, I want him to come home. But the reason I bring that up is because that was the last time I really touched him, and it was great having my arms around him for those 2 minutes, and I'd forgotten how
Mhm.
strong and how quick he is. I overestimated my ability to
Sure.
stop him. And at that time, the end of it was the police put him in the back of their car and they drove him wherever he wanted to go. And we were telling him, my wife was telling the police, we want him to come home. He's homeless. He has PTSD. But this is what happens every time. They just drive him off. And so in Orlando, he just walked off. And but I've been
Yeah.
thinking about him all the time with my work, and then my wife is in great pain because she has this wonderful, gentle, super loving relationship with him, and she can't stand to think of him. And it happens all the time when we're in a city. You see a homeless person, we know immediately that we're both thinking of it. We go to a party, someone makes some offhand remark, we know immediately. But in general, I would like to say that most people are very delicate, and women and mothers have been wonderful about it. And almost 99% of people are super sensitive and wonderful and caring and helpful to us. And so Ansley does not want to see him. Just every time we've tried and we've almost got him, the police have gotten involved. We've had these altercations and this violence happens, and it's been a horrible thing. And then he goes off and you don't see him for another year. So she definitely doesn't want that to happen.
And a
And
lot of this has to do with the fact that I think maybe some of our viewers may not understand, but there are HIPAA policies and rules and
right,
regulations for people who are mentally ill. I mean, you can't just grab a person and institutionalize them anymore. You can't grab a person and lock them up, hold them against their will. So, as long as he doesn't do anything to break the law, um, really the police are powerless, right?
and the police, the last time we had him in a hospital, and we had everything signed by a judge, by lawyers, by the police, by the hospital administration, by a psychiatrist. Everyone signed off that we would get him in there and they would get him treatment. They had him in there for 20 minutes and they released him. And they told my son and me that he was lucid. And my son and I fought against it. And then we went down and we saw him just for a minute. But in general, they put him in the car and the police drove him off. The police were very nice, very polite, and everything about it. But the hospital said we can't keep him because he was lucid. But back to the family. So just Ansley, it just breaks her heart, my wife's heart. And Andrew was such a gentle boy and a young man, and it's very, very tough on her. And also, our children are getting married. We hope they're going to have children, and we would love to see Andrew having that. And then my son Patty was very close to Andrew. He's the older son in the relationship, and they had a lot of fun together. And they were they used to go camping and canoeing and skiing and everything together. They went to the same high school. They were both really good athletes, and so Patty he's very much a goal-oriented guy, and he's very driven to find Andrew. At the drop of a hat, he's on the plane to get him. And then Eliza was the middle one in our family, and she's a few years younger than Patty, and I mean a few years younger than Andrew. She's actually the youngest one in the family, and she was very close to Andrew growing up, and has all kinds of fun stories. We told some fun stories on Andrew, like the time he was babysitting her, and he was as a teenager he was all into mountain climbing and climbing trees, and he got all this tree rig stuff and ropes and everything. So he decided he wanted to go off for a few minutes and do something in the middle of the babysitting job, and he put Eliza in the tree equipment, and then put her up on top of the tree, and then tied it off and left her there for an hour. They had so many good times, and they also look alike and are kind of built alike. And she is really good with technology, and has been our source for Facebook and everything. As is Andrew's godmother and Aunt Allison, who is a force of nature and also worked hard with all the Facebook and getting the message out there. So it's been
You,
very
you,
hard
you
on her.
you think? I mean, again, something like this podcast, Andrew probably may or may not see. Somebody else out there may see this and reach out to him and say, "Hey, I think I saw somebody talking about you the other day." I mean, what would you like to say to him if he had an opportunity to listen to you right now?
Well, that's a good point. We would like to say, we would like to say that Andrew, we all love you. We're thinking about you all the time. We realize you've wanted this freedom and you're enjoying the blue skies and the beautiful weather out in the Southwest. And if you would get in communication with us, we would like to help you out and help you with some funding to help you get set up, and we could send you some. You could get a nice place to stay out there, and eventually you get a job, and we could help you set this up. Or what we love, of course, is for you to come back to Maryland, and at first you could be right here on the farm. We got a room ready for you. I can make cheese omelet you ever seen with the spiciest spices on it first thing in the morning. We can go for hikes every day, and I got a good horse I can put you on. Andrew's a really, really good rider, and Andrew, you are a good rider, although you do need to slow down when you ride. If you could just listen to me, not jump the big fences and go a little slower, I think that would help on this horse. But we would love for you to come home, Patty and I, and your Aunt Allison, and your Uncle Graham, who's a Marine, as you know, come home. And if you want a nice truck driving job, we can get you that, or I could get you truck driving. You can get a truck driving job yourself in one day, and I can get you a job on the racetrack working with horses, equine therapy, which I'm very much into. I can get you that job in 5 minutes. So come on home.
Come home. I mean, the book is called "War's Over. Come Home."
Right.
Well, I'm telling you, Patrick, my heart goes out to you. Um, I'm positive that all those who've heard you today are empathetic and they feel for you and they feel for your family. I hope if Andrew is listening or has a chance to listen, my brother, there's no shame in what's happened. That's part of life. It happened. So now let's get ready for the next chapter, because the next chapter, you'll be surrounded by those who can help you. And I guarantee you, if you find him, you let him know probably the therapies and things that he went through before, so many other veterans have turned their back on. But this therapy that I'm talking about, which is called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories, if you look it up, Patrick, you'll realize that this is probably one of the most efficacious treatments for PTSD that mankind has found.
I
And
looked it. I looked it up, and I heard your podcast with your great friend, Dove.
okay, okay.
It,
Well, then you know. I mean, it's true. It's there. Help is there for him, and I hope he gets it. And keep us posted, please. If anything that we can do, and I know that our office has probably asked you for pictures and things that we can put in this podcast, so people may see him. And we don't want them to approach him and try to say, "I want to arrest you." None of that stuff. We just want them to go up and, with true compassion and empathy, reach out and let him know that there are people who have his back, and all we want from him is the best.
Thank you very much, Montel. He would like this coming from you, a fellow veteran.
Again, the book is called War's Over, Come Home. If people wanted to reach out and get a copy, I'm sure it's available at Barnes & Noble and all the bookstores, but can they get it online also?
Yes, and then go to my website, patricksmithwick.com. It'll show you how to get the book, or from the publisher. Tide Pool is the publisher, and it should be in bookstores and on Amazon. The launch date is coming up soon, May 16th.
Okay, for sure, sir. Well, keep us posted. Let us know what's up. I can't thank you enough for being a part of the show today, Patrick. Thank you for being on Free Thinking. And for all of you out there, please make sure you tune into the next episode of Free Thinking with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear feedback, so please send us your comments.